Hello, welcome to what is going to be a much longer tutorial on multi-item sorters. Now, in Minecraft, we will get lots and lots of items, and the sorter I prefer to use is a multi-item sorter, simply because this means that you can have more than one item targeting each chest. So we have a look at this thing behind me. We have a very 6-side multi-item sorter at the moment. As we can see, both coal and iron go into this chest, lapis, diamond, emerald, quartz, and so on. And the way they work is if there's room for the item in the chest, e.g. Either an empty slot or a stack that's not full, it'll insert it, otherwise it goes to the next chest. So you don't need a chest for every item you might want to sort in, you can actually group some of them together. So let's just chuck some items in here and see what actually happens. So this is our feed system. We're going to chuck 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. End of the day, we've done lots of mining, we want it all to go in. So what's happening is the items come up here, feed into the system. As we can see, we've got coal turning up here and iron turning up here, gold and redstone all turning up. I think we should get some more in a second maybe. Still coming through. There's the diamond, we just saw one turn up then. So emerald. We've got an empty chest at the bottom, so we'll just chuck in some sapling and they should turn up here eventually. It is a little bit noisy while the water elevator is running, but that goes quite quickly. And essentially the system backs up around here. We have a hopper here and a dispenser here. Now, I do suggest actually building this one higher and having a chest and another hopper here as a buffer so that if you get a lot of items into your system all at once, they don't all sit waiting on top of the hopper instead. The way this system works is quite simple. So for a multi-item sorter, it's all about having a feed hopper and a lock hopper. So if the hopper is locked, and I have a lever here to demonstrate this, we put an item in, you can see that the item flows straight over into this chest with an empty inventory slot. However, if we unlock it, instead of going here, it goes here. That's because the pull down is faster than the one across. So in order to get this to work, what you need to do is you need to have a descending pulse. As we can see here, if I turn this off and on again, we can see that the pulse is descending very, very slowly. And we achieve this by having a descended repeater line. Now in the main system, the delay is set to 5 ticks. This is because you need a minimum of 4 ticks in order to allow the top hopper, the feed hopper, a chance to feed into the chest. However, at 4 ticks it can be a little bit iffy. So I prefer to use 2 repeaters so you can have the option of 5 ticks. If your server's particularly laggy, you might want to extend it out to 8 ticks all the way down. But the main principle is you want to create this descending off signal that runs down so that the hoppers release one by one. So once you've got that descending signal to your hoppers, the next thing you need to do is to feed it into your hoppers. So we've got our descending signal, and we just have a way of making it so that on each level the signal feeds into one hopper at a time. Now, we have a delay here. The reason we have a delay here and no delay here is if you look over on our main system, as it descends, both of these are on the same input. So we've got a delay here matching the delay here so that it is as if this block is from over here. That's why the delay is over here as well. So we've got our locking hoppers, we've got our descending pulse, and the last thing we need is some sort of clock. Now the reason we need a clock is if we flood the hoppers, what's going to happen is the feed hopper will feed one item that's within it, but it'll still have a backlog. We don't want a So the way we get around that is we use a dropper feeding into a barrel, feeding into a hopper. So what happens is if this feeds up with items, it releases this redstone signal, which releases this clock, which allows us to run. I've got it at 4 ticks, but in the system over there it's at 5. And it's doing 2 things. Just pull the items out for the moment. So when the clock's not running, it's holding on the signal. So that's as if that lever's over there is on. It's holding on the signal. And when it pulses, the first thing that happens is that torch turns off. So that turns off, this turns on, that runs up and pulses the hopper. So the dropper pulses immediately when the clock's activated, and also on each signal of the clock. So this turns off, on, back into here, turns off again, and comes around in a cycle like this. So if we put our items back in our hopper over here, we can see that we've got this pulsing and this pulsing, but they're out of sync. And the only remaining component we need, so we can lock and unlock our hoppers, we've got a descending pulse, we've got a way of feeding that descending pulse into our hoppers, and we've got a clock to limit the item so that it's only one item per pulse coming down. So as the pulse descends, there's only one item going through the system. We need a way of getting the items back up. Now you can use a dropper elevator. I'll explain why you might not want to in a little bit. But I'm using a water elevator instead. So the water elevator is very simple. You've got a dropper feeding into a soul sand block, which would have water above it. It's important that on this layer you have blocks on each side of the soul sand block, otherwise what can happen is the item will pop out over here rather than up here. When there's items in the dropper, it pushes this piston up, that's a sticky piston, and starts an observer clock. So we'll just put some items in here to demonstrate. You can see all the items are popping up here quite rapidly. It runs very, very quickly, so it is noisy while it's running, but it's not for very long. The other advantage of using water elevators, though, and this is not the last advantage, this is just the one I'm coming to next, is you can also insert into the middle of a water stream. So if I put some items here, what we should see is they will come up. So what this means is if this is your multi-item sorter, you can feed into it at your base, but you can also feed into it at the bottom of your mine. Anywhere underneath the water elevator is a suitable place to feed into the system. So when we put it together, we have our feed into the system, which feeds into our dropper, which runs a clock, which runs our descending pulse at 5 ticks a level. Our clock's also at 5 ticks, which feeds into our dropper line. When the item gets into the bottom, it'll feed over into the next elevator, and then back up to the top, and the process repeats for the next module. Now, this module itself is 2 by 2. This does present some challenging with tiling. So if you want to save on your iron, you don't have an iron farm, you don't have a lot of iron, you can use this tiling design. So this is a 4 by 10 footprint using mineral iron. So the only iron you need is 1 per chest you're going this way, and a small amount to take the items this way for the water streams. So the brown's your chest, water elevator, the redstone system you can see there, chest, and the grey is your hopper line. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. In terms of heights, you're going to need 4 spaces beneath your bottom chest to allow for the components for the dropper elevator, because it actually has to make sure it doesn't enter with any other redstone. You'll have your chest however far you want up, and this is important to note. You don't have to have it 6 high, you can have it a lot higher than 6. And then you need another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 blocks above your last chest for the components above, or more if you're going to have a buffer above here. So 6, 7, 8 if you're going to have a buffer above. This doesn't lead to a particularly efficient tiling system, but it does allow you to have chest, item frame with label, a light to show you the system's running, chest, item frame with well, you can either see your water elevator, or you put an item frame there, or you can put your item frame here instead and not have your lights. If you want to be a little bit more efficient, you can also run the system tiled like this. So chest, chest, spare block, chest, chest, spare block. So these are the gaps that are between the modules so the redstone doesn't interfere. But what we do is we put the water elevators at the back and run the items all the way back to the water elevator back and then all the way back before they feed into the system. It does use a lot more iron this way, but it does mean that you can squeeze them in a little bit more narrowly. However, we're not done. This is the end goal. So the way these systems work is whenever these dropouts activate, a pulse clock runs that runs this line only. However, so long as there's no interference between two clocks, so long as you only have one clock per hopper line, it doesn't matter if you overrun it. If you're running an off signal to a set of hoppers with no items in it, so long as it's in sync with the clock, it shouldn't matter. It should still work quite perfectly well because the line runs the hopper and the hopper starts the signal. So as long as the signal coming into the hopper to trigger it is synced with the hoppers, you can actually share this clock between two lines of hoppers, which is what we've done over here. So what's happening over here, it's the same principle as over there, we're just sharing a clock. So what happens is it's a little bit more complicated because we've got some AND OR logic here, but both of these comparators feed into two redstone. If either of these redstones fire, it'll start one of these repeaters to make sure the signal's strained. So if that one's got one item in it, it's not going to launch that repeater, but because we've got both of them, one of these will light up, and because they're repeaters, they'll light up strong, which is enough to turn off the torch, which is enough to release the clock. We've got a positive input from the clock running this way to our droppers, and we've got a negative input from our clock holding the hoppers. This here is the same pulse dropping system I showed you earlier. Same one, same principle. And over here we've only got a slight variation. So 5 ticks, 5 ticks, 5 ticks, but over here we have 6 ticks, 6 ticks, 6 ticks, and the reason for that is in the middle, in order to feed into these blocks, so that this redstone feeds into this block, we had to put a repeater in, which adds another tick delay. So that means this whole system is running on one extra delay. But if we put in a stack of items, we can sort of see what happens. So I'll put in a full stack, and you can watch the pulse go down. Now I've got this, and as you can see, this dropping line of off ticks is still working, and it's in sync. So that means that when you do the full design, it's tileable in this direction. So for every double chest that you have, so that's one double chest running this way, one double chest running this way, you can, if you want to, run them this way instead next to each other. The problem with that, though, is if you do that, where do you put your item frame? Because it tiles right next to each other all the way down, so you're putting your item frame on the chests now, which is why when you do this design, it's probably better to run your chest this way. So that you can put your item frames in this block and this block instead. I don't believe it's possible to make a system that tiles any more strongly than this, and it's down to the hopper lines. Possibly, theoretically, like if you could get even closer, possibly. There's just some limits around the hoppers, so you have to be pan blocks here and here in order to be able to feed a hopper. Which means that you can't get any closer than this. So if these two butted together and there was a way such that this redstone didn't interfere with that redstone, or if it did interfere, it was a positive interference, you could get one more closer again. It'd work for the water elevators at the back. It might work for the system. You might be able to share one clock amongst 4 lines instead of 2. However, this is tileable one apart all the way down and pretty dense in the horizontal direction already. It's not using very much fancy redstone, like these are just repeaters and item lines. You can go all the way down to bedrock with this. As long as the redstone signals and all the chunks are loaded, there's no reason why this shouldn't run going down as far as it wants. There's no redstone lines that are running particularly long. There's no fader circuits that are working within a time out bounds. So it's pretty good already. Like I said, it's entirely possible that you could get it even denser by getting this system to line up with this system, but personally, I'm happy with this system. This is perfectly fine by me. So to go through the principles again, very, very briefly. The sender pulse at a 5-tick interval. 4 ticks would be enough for the hoppers to work, but 4 ticks is barely enough, so it's safer to go 5 ticks. Something to feed it into the blocks next to your hoppers so that you get that descending pulse signal. A clock to make sure that you don't flood the system with items all at once, with a buffer above here, and then some sort of item elevator to send the items up. And as I said before, there's a reason why I'd like to use a water elevator instead of a dropper elevator. Because once you get to the full system, I don't want to make a dropper elevator that tall personally. So we'll leave the video there. Thank you for watching. I hope that this dropper elevator and multi-item sorter is useful for your build. I personally plan to be using the hell out of it, because there's one thing I don't like, it's trying to manually sort my items. Thank you for watching.